Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Just Like Home, that remodeling show. My name's Michael. I'm sitting here with my good friend, Mr. Brian Powers of Powers Family Construction in Laguna Niguel. Brian, how you doing today?
I'm feeling fabulous, Michael. And how are you?
Well, thank you for asking. And you did that so, just off the cuff. Nobody had to ask you. I feel glad that you did that. I understand that you have got an amazing, incredibly exciting show for us today entitled Water Damage and Mold. I just don't know what could be more exciting than water damage and mold. So I'm personally really looking forward to this show.
Well, it's a kind of a different word than exciting, but it is something that feels like exciting because the amount of adrenaline and the amount of craziness and the amount of urgency that you feel when you have a water damage or mold. It is quite an exciting event in your life. And if you've ever been through it, and those of you out there who have, or those of you right now who are watching this that are looking to step in to try to repair one, looking for tips, you got the right place.
Good. And just like mold, I know this show's going to grow on you. Oh my gosh.
Did you just go there?
Somebody stop me.
Yes.
Okay, you go ahead.
All right. Well, there's a lot to know about mold and water damage. Mold is one of the things I want to say that we'll talk about it a little bit after the water damage segment, but it is important to try to do the water damage correctly so that if it's done correctly, you won't add mold or create mold in the process. And there's many reasons why not to do that and what to do, and we'll go over that in the scoop today.
All right,
but water damage, right?
Let's talk about water damage.
What is it good for? Absolutely nothing. I'm just saying, because ultimately, it's going to happen from time to time in different properties. And the biggest thing is, if you are a handyman watching this or a contractor that's kind of familiar with some of the aspects of it, there's some pointers and things that you really need to know. So this episode is really going to be towards the homeowner who just needs to know in general, but also to those professionals that are close to being, let's say properly trained. But ultimately, if you have any question at all, you should hire a properly trained remediation company or personnel who's going to really take their time and do it right, because of bad water damage, cleanup, remediation is just a nightmare. It could make it worse than the original damage.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've lived through that before, and it was a nightmare at our house. They had to tear out walls and had giant fans, and people had to walk in with mold detectors, and oh my gosh, it was 4 weeks of unfun times.
Yeah, it really can amount up to a lot of time, effort, money, your health. It could be at risk if you really get a bad mold problem. Yeah. So, the first question that I get is that a lot of times people are looking for different ways to go about it. They might see equipment for rent here or there, but I get asked the question: do you need to have a license to do water damage? That's a valid question.
That's a good question.
So, the truth is there's not an active category for water damage remediation. However, and we're talking about the state of California now, and most states, the state of California kind of leaves it to kind of like what's happening in the actual activity. So if there is just literally water extraction, they're going to come and they're going to remove the water. Maybe there's water in the floor or something. They're sucking up the water and they're getting it, but there's nothing being torn out. There's nothing being removed, or then theoretically, it doesn't require the technology of a contractor or contractor's license. But it does require is the professionalism and training of having somebody who knows what to do and how to do it and for how long, and to have a good result. Because remember, the first thing to watch out for is making sure that we don't make the water damage into a mold damage job.
Yeah, that's a nightmare for sure.
So for those homeowners out there, no, you don't have to have a contractor's license, but it is highly recommended that their ICRC Certified, which is a governing body agency that trains out there. There are other agencies. That's the one I think is the best. But just making sure that they're properly trained, certified, so that you're going to get at least the most current understanding of how to mitigate these things to the best degree. Having a company, if their company's coming in, that they have insurance, that they have the proper technical, that they're protecting you and protecting their staff as well. But if they're going to get into demolition and they're going to do more work than that, yes, a licensed contractor is recommended, and typically a B contractor's license would be the appropriate, not a carpet cleaning license, but a general contractor's license, and that's what they generally rely on. So obviously we do this type of work, and we've been using under our general contractor's license and providing these services for years. For a while I had a partner, or a couple of partners actually in the business, and so that's where I started, and we just do it now for our current clients that work with Powers Family Construction.
So you recommend that if they hire a professional, they need to make sure they're, what is it, IRIC certified?
Yeah, IICRC.
IICRC.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that again is just one of the governing agencies or governing body. It's not really a governing body, but it's an agency that provides up to date training and things like that. The biggest thing I think with any kind of water damage is acting quickly. And acting quickly can help you limit the amount of remediation that you have to do. So reduce moisture contact to anything you can. So if there's water, remove contents from the area. Extracting the water, putting towels on the ground, anything you can do to minimize it. If depending on how big it is, if it's a flood, a couple of towels aren't going to make much of a difference. But if it's a small room or an area, a laundry room, something like that, or just near a kitchen, but it doesn't mean it's over at that point. But it does mean that you're at least finding the water, because the water will find the lowest level and will level itself. So if it's on the floor, it's going to find its way under the floor into the concrete and try to find its way, down. So it's going to seep and surge into different areas. But there's one caveat on there is, I say reduce moisture contact as soon as possible. There's a caveat about wood furniture, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in the procedures. But the next thing would be, to be able to test and monitor once you've reduced the amount of standing water or any kind of thing like that. Carpeting, usually we recommend to pull the carpeting up to remove the carpet padding if there's a carpeted area, because the padding is just going to hold it like a sponge, and it's going to be very difficult, and it's relatively inexpensive to replace. So
can you put, if you rip up the carpet padding, can you put the original carpet back down over the new padding?
So here's the answer to that. There is some technicalities to that. If it is a water pipe leak, or let's say you overflowed the sink, potentially not a problem if it's a clean remediation done quickly, that the carpet can be reused. The padding should be thrown away. However, if the toilet overflows, or you have category 3 stormwater that comes through the house, flood that, you don't know where the water came from, but it came up and into the house, then you're talking about complete replacement of these saturated items, especially that are porous or organic in nature.
That makes sense.
But let's just say we're talking right now about a simple pipe leak, or an angle stop, a valve that's under the sink, something like that. That's a little bit different style than the toilet type of. Well, so it's generally clean water, but it gets dirty, obviously, being on the ground, and so. But we do want to clean it. So one of the things about cleaning the water is what we want to make sure that once we get the moisture out, when I say the standing water, is that we want to treat everything that got wet with a disinfectant. And why? And you say, so people, why do you do that?
Why do you do that?
Because why do you do it right away? It's still wet. It's not dry yet. Well, the concept is that you want to saturate it with the disinfectant. So as it's drying, it's not able to create bacteria, create even possible microbial growth, because it will really stunt that activity, and keep it from souring and smelling. Mildew also accompanies, mold. But mildew can be on its own as well without mold. and that's where you get that sour or kind of yucky smell.
Yeah.
And that can happen in a lot of different ways with a lot of different surfaces. So making sure that you do that. TSP is a great disinfectant to use for that. Trisodium phosphate, you can get it at the grocery store or the hardware store to use as a disinfectant. We tend to use other products that are a little bit more broader spectrum. We use a product called Mold Armor is a brand name. Can probably get it at Home Depot. Another one called Shock Wave. And these products are not only a disinfectant, but they're an antiviral and antibacterial. They're typically used in hospitals, doctors' offices. I believe they fight against MRSA and HIV, as well as many other types of pathogens that might be lurking around. So it's a really good one to use, especially if you don't know where the water came from. I would use something a little bit more. And then, of course, that needs to get treated in a way where it's protecting, you're using the proper protective gear, facial mask that's going to cover a vented mask so that you're not breathing in something like that. TSP is not so bad because it's just, a typical household type cleaner. But some of these other products might be a little bit heavier. So again, using a professional, a mask that would give you the
Yeah,
proper.
I've used that TSP stuff before. It worked good, but I had to wear rubber gloves.
Yeah.
And I did wear a mask. It was not the most fun smell in the world, but it was it seemed kind of dangerous. They said don't get it on your hands. So
Yeah, TSP is a little bit more milder than the other stuff we're talking about. Anything that's like that, it can be acidic and can be corrosive, but also when inhaled, that's usually when the more damage is done. So it's really important to understand, have good ventilation in the space that you're using. And then when it comes to setting up, you need to probably set up equipment. When I say probably, because if you have water standing on the floor, it's going to soak into the walls and baseboards and trim and everything around the area. And so obviously setting up equipment, well, what kind of equipment? You need dehumidification and air movers. The air movers would be placed in there to circulate the air and blow air onto the wet surfaces. Sometimes people say, okay, is there a method to that? And typically what we'll do is we'll do it so that it circulates within a room or a space. So that way all the fans are pointed in a direction that's going to circulate together and kind of cyclone that, because what we want is the dehumidifiers that are placed in the same area that are going to pull the moisture out of the air. That's what their jobs are. And then the fans help with evaporation, which then takes the water from the structure into the air. And then, of course, that process goes on with the two pieces of equipment. Having one piece or not of the other equipment, it doesn't work, or it really won't work well. The caveat to that is I do have some friends out in the desert communities, and when it's 95 degrees out at night and 1% humidity or 110 during the day, yes, you can open the windows and you can, they're like, dehumidifiers, what are those? I'm teasing, but to the degree that, depending on the climate that you're in. And in the same breath, if you're in a very humid climate, let's say now you're in the Bahamas or you're in Florida or something like that in the summertime and it's 80% humidity, there's also precautions to be taken for that. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. But typically speaking, we're going to get that airflow pattern, circling cyclone style. We've treated the wet surfaces, all the wet surfaces, including the concrete, with our disinfectant or our shockwave or anti-mold, antimicrobial. But the next thing is once we get all that stuff set up, we may have a bigger area than, like, it only got wet in one area of the bigger room. We would potentially set up a containment area which would contain the amount of air or the amount of area that we're treating to try to dry that area quicker. So sometimes it's as simple as closing a door and closing off the other parts of the rooms so that it's only handling the room that you're at. So that's real important, not to just have an open area. Then the next thing is going to be that you need to test and monitor. And you test and monitor. That's where some of the experience comes in. There are some templates you can find online.
So who does that? Do I, as the homeowner, do that, or does the company come in and do
Well,
the
if,
test
if,
and
if you've
monitor?
hired a company to do it, nothing should be done by the homeowner.
Okay.
Okay. With the exception of, and then we'll talk about that a little bit later about contents manipulation, contents moving stuff, moving furniture, getting stuff out of the area. Document your time, everybody. If you get into it, and if you're working, you're starting yourself before the plumber can get there, or before somebody can get there, and you're moving clothes out, and you're moving dishes out, whatever you're doing, and you're boxing things out, just keep kind of a tab of that time that it took you to do that, because there's a reason for that. When we talk a little bit about the end result, but that other than that, we would want to make sure that we're testing. If you're, again, that super savvy homeowner or a handyman, a tool like this tool right here, is a moisture reading tool. And so this is one that you can find. It's made by General. It's probably one of the more cost-effective type units. There are relative humidity meters. There are many other meters that are much better than this. And some contractors will actually use an infrared style screens, and they can try to find evaporation on the walls where it shows up on the screen, and you can tell where the moisture is on the walls. But for the average, contractor, or for the average homeowner, handyman, to find out something's wet, basically just turning it on and putting this surface against the surface that you think may be wet, and that's to read it. This is called a non-penetrating meter. But this particular meter is ideal because it does the penetrating and non-penetrating. Why would you have that question, right?
Why would I have that?
Why would you have both, or why would you need both? Yeah. Well, sometimes you have surfaces that you don't want to penetrate with a penetrating meter, so you want to be careful. It's a painted finished surface, it's a cabinet, it's a finished floor. A penetrating meter has these little needles on it, and these things here would literally penetrate into the structure.
Yeah, hold that up so we can.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and so these would literally go into the structure, of wood, drywall, even touching concrete, things like that, to give you a good idea. And it's a really a true read. I've just turned it on, but I wanted to just give you an idea that things can be wet and you not feel and you feel them and they don't feel wet. So, oh, this is dry. It's okay. Don't rely on your hands and your body to tell you if something's wet or not. The reason is because we're made of water, and when we test the meter, this particular meter is going to go up, and you can see that the red lines there are telling us, okay, that's wet. Well, I'm not wet. My hand's not even wet. But it's reading that closely behind the skin that it can tell that there's moisture there that you can't feel.
That makes sense.
So it's really important to have the proper metering, because you're not going to have an accurate understanding. And I've seen mold, and people have big trouble and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. We mopped it up, and it seemed fine. Okay, and then a month later, they end up with a musty smell and that mildew smell. And unfortunately, now they might have a bigger problem than they did to start with. So it's really important to complete the project properly. That's why I typically say, if this is not something that you've done before, or you've been part of, or if it's real small, maybe you can work on it with these tips. But hiring a professional is really the right way to go, and making sure that the professional is properly qualified with the certifications, and really to be licensed and insured is the best way, because if you do require demolition, things being taken out, you don't want someone just to rip the house apart either. So these guys are trained, and we're trained to not necessarily remove all the cabinetry, but to be able to get access to things. You remove maybe just the baseboard and be able to get access and airflow to the baseboard areas, the low parts of the walls, and get airflow behind there. So maybe, just maybe, if it's not so bad, we can get it dried out without having to repair drywall. Actually, we can put the baseboards back over the holes that we drilled, because they're behind the profile of the baseboard, but yet still getting access to inside the wall where the water or the moisture may be. Wow. So there's different ways to do it. So not always do you have to just cut out the drywall. Now, there are some caveats to that. If it's flooded and it's really, really wet, it's going to take way too long and maybe even cause mold or cause a problem because it's so wet, you need to have access to it. So removing the drywall in some cases, and when I say removing the drywall, typically the saturated part, maybe 16 to 24 inches up on the floors. If their flood came from that direction, sometimes it comes through the floor from an upstairs area, and that's a little bit different as well. If you have compromised ceilings with water, typically removing the drywall is appropriate because the nailing and the way that the drywall is hung is compromised once the paper gets wet. And it's recommended to remove that for safety reasons because you might stay up there, but then a mallet might be loose, and it may have worked its way loose, and you're going to end up with cracking and other things later, even if it's not a hazard to fall down, but it could fall down.
You've got a lot of really helpful information about this whole process. Would it be possible that we could do like a second part to this whole to the water damage and mold? Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because I'm just getting started. I mean, really, when you need to find out what's important,
Yeah.
these definitely are some things, and I've got a lot more to share.
Well, let's do that. So what we're going to do is I want you guys to stay tuned because in Brian's next podcast, he's going to give you part 2 of the water damage and mold stuff. Brian, in the meantime, if anybody has any questions, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, definitely they can get us at our telephone in Southern California at 949-310-3996. That's me personally and direct. Or they can call us at 949-488-3207, and that's our office line.
And you've got a website, powersfamilyconstruction.com.
.com.
All right, cool. Okay, so in that case, I want to thank you for being here today, Brian. Thank you guys for joining us. That was great. We'll see you again next time with another episode of Just Like Home, that remodeling show.